Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're located. My name is Karen Righthand, and I'm the Vice President of Corporate Marketing here at SCS Global Services, and I'll be your host today. On behalf of everyone here at SCS, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, a 2024 update on environmental product declarations. Before I introduce our speakers for today's webinar, I'd like to take a moment to update you all of you listeners on our event platform, GoToWebinar. To avoid any unnecessary background noises during the presentation, all of the attendees have been muted, and this will remain a one-way presentation for the duration of the event. If you'd like to ask a question, please go to the questions section in your control panel and type in your question as you think of it and hit send, and your question will be sent to the panel for review. Be sure to ask your questions as they come up, and no need to wait to the end, and we'll take as many questions as we can. Depending on the amount of time, if we don't get to every question, we can always answer them offline via email. So today's presentation is also, I want to let everyone know that it's being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to you after the presentation. So no worries about asking that question, because that's being taken care of. And with that, I would like to get into the topic for today. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. Keith Killpack is our Technical Director for the Environmental Certification Services Division, and Beth is our EPD Program Manager. And now I'd like to just, I don't know how many of you are familiar with SCS Global Services, so I'd like to just go over who we are in case people are new. We are an international leader in third-party sustainability certification, consulting, standards development, auditing, and we are now in our 40th year of operation. We've done over 30,000 certifications in 125 countries for 15,000 or more clients, and we have auditors in every major market. We have certifications and have services in virtually every sector of the economy. So we are working to advance sustainability through all the different certifications that we do, and we have auditors and offices literally across the globe. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Beth and let her take us into our topic for today.
All righty, thank you, Karen. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to give just a brief overview for you of what an environmental product declaration is and how it works. So we start with an environmental product declaration. To get that, we start with a product category rule, which defines the type of product and then dictates the rules of how we are supposed to do that LCA study and what the EPD should look like, and will tell us what the different impacts are that we have to look at. So that product category rule tells us how to do the LCA study. The LCA study is then completed by an LCA practitioner. It is documented in an LCA report. That LCA report generally can be 50 to 60, maybe 70 pages, maybe a little longer depending on how complex the product is. And then after that, so the LCA report will explain all the environmental impacts, how they're measured, looks at all the different scenarios that a manufacturer or client might want to take a look at in the LCA. The LCA report then is summarized in the public-facing disclosure, which is the environmental product declaration. And this is, it is built on a standardized format based on the PCR. They are conformant to ISO 14025. Environmental products themselves don't compare products, but they do help make the comparisons easier. And for a Type 3 environmental product declaration, they are independently certified or verified by an external party. Just a quick look at the product category rules. So what they are, we use product category rules to help us define the geographic scope of the study, the product scope, of course, what type of product are we looking at? The functional unit, so this is the unit of measure that we're basing the study on. Are we basing it on 1 kilogram of product, or 1 square meter of product, or one product itself? It depends on the product category itself, the type of product that it is. It also defines for us what the reference service life is for the product. So how long is that product expected to last while it's being used, typically in a building or in some sort of construction project or works. The PCR will also tell us what life cycle stages we're looking at. Are we looking at just the raw material through the manufacturer of the product, or are we also going to include distribution and installation? Are we going to include the use phase? Is there any maintenance or repair that's done during the use or the lifetime of the product? And then finally, that last life cycle stage of the end of life. And so we look at their how the product is dismantled or deconstructed from the building, any processing for it, transporting that waste then to its end of life or the final disposal of the product. The PCR will also give us some calculation rules. So this tells us the rules about how we allocate certain things, how we calculate just about anything in the study, all of the rules for how to do that. The impact assessment method. So are we going to be looking at global warming, acidification, eutrophication, all of those different methods and impact categories, and what method of that impact are we looking at? Is it going to be Tracy from the EPA? Are we looking at using CML, which is typically European? There are quite a lot of different methods and impact categories that we look at, and it depends on the product category which ones we're going to look at for your study. And then it also tells us the EPD format, what needs to be included in that EPD. Where we get the product category rules are from program operators, trade associations, industry, academia, government. Mostly though it is program operators and trade associations. How we find a PCR, so there are several different program operators here in North America and globally. Some of the top ones for PCRs are listed here. We have ourselves, SCS, UL, NSF, Smart EPD. EPD International is based in Europe, and EBU is also based in Europe. They typically have the European PCRs, although they can have a global context as well. Some trade associations may have PCRs available as well. And I put these 2 links on here. So there's the ACLCA website where they have a PCR catalog on the website. It is specific to the North American program operators. I would say it's mostly up and running. I don't know that all of the North American PCRs are listed there currently, but they are working on getting it updated as much as possible. So that is one link that you can go to find a PCR if you don't want to go to each individual program operator. And then for the European PCRs, there's something called Eco Platform, and this doesn't list the PCRs themselves, but it does give you a link and list to all of the various program operators for the European platforms that have specific European PCRs and rules to follow. So I have that link on here for you as well. So one of the questions we get a lot is, what do we do if there's no PCR? We can't expect that every single different type of product out there is going to have a PCR, especially not right away. The industry, I would say we are working on it. We're getting there. If there is no PCR and your products are specific to a North American market, we generally will use the North American, we will use the ISO 21930 standard as the core PCR. And so that helps us with the North American markets. For the European market, and this is, I would say this is if your products are specifically only marketed in Europe, the core PCR that we're going to use is generally the EN 15804 plus A2 standard. The international EPD program does have a basic construction products PCR that does follow EN 15804, but sometimes the construction products one may not be suitable for the product itself. So we would use the EN 15804 for products that are specific to European markets. When we have something that's for a global market, in general, for a global market, if there's no PCR, we're going to use ISO 21930 because 21930 does have the specifications for the impact methods to use for North America, for Europe, and for international as well. So when we have something that's global, we would prefer to use ISO 21930 for the base PCR if there is no PCR available. Here's a look at how the process for getting an LCA works. And this is, I would say, I don't want to say it's specific to SCS, but this is our flow of how we do LCA here at SCS. We start with project scoping, where we talk with the client and define what products or processes are going to need to be assessed, what level of detail, and what are those system boundaries. Are we only going to do cradle to gate, or do we do cradle to grave? And this is also where we're going to define what PCR we're going to be using, because that helps us with that level of detail and system boundaries. Once we have that set in place, we start our lifecycle inventory process, which is where we collect and analyze the data for all of the environmental inputs that are associated with the manufacturer or any lifecycle stage of the product itself. Any outputs, is there emissions, is there waste, that sort of thing. We collect all of that data, we analyze it, we make sure that it makes sense. We do, I call it a sense check on the data. Once we have that complete, we start working on the impact assessment phase, which is where we're going to classify all of that data and we put it and we model it into a software that helps us do all of those calculations for the environmental impacts. And once we have that part finished, then we go on and do the interpretation phase, which is where we're now going to take all of that information that we've had previously and we're going to put it into the LCA report. And as part of that report, we analyze the results and we give an interpretation of the results. And then from here is where we can go on to get an EPD. So this is just a quick glance at what an EPD looks like. This is one of our standard EPDs. So once we've gone through that whole LCA process, now we can take all of that information and put it here into the EPD itself. So now let's talk about how we're going to use those EPDs for LEED. So if you're not familiar with the LEED rating system, I would highly suggest that you reach out or go to the USGBC website and take a look at LEED and get a little bit more familiar with it. But in brief, it is a rating system that is used to help promote green buildings. The LEED certifications are looking for high efficient, cost savings, green buildings, but it looks at more than just environment. So it does look at other things such as social and other impacts as well. So it takes the entire impact of the building and into consideration. So it's looking at you know, how good the building is, not just for the environment, but for the community and the people working in it as well. EPDs are one of the tools that can be used in the LEED certification system in order to help get your credits for the LEED systems. There are two different options for the EPDs in LEED. The first option is, I have it here listed for you on the screen. There are several different ways that you can achieve a point in option number one. In order to get those points in option number one, you need to have 20 product-specific EPDs for permanently installed products from 5 different manufacturers. So I do have a slide here in a few slides that will show you how to do this calculation. But here's just a look at the different ways that you can achieve those 20 different product-specific EPDs. One would be for publicly available LCA that is done to ISO 14044. The LCA critical review for that is usually done internally. This is something that's usually done in-house, and there's no EPD verification because it's just the LCA portion of it. And then we have what we call the product-specific Type 3 EPD. These are based on ISO 14025, ISO 21930, or the EN 15804 standard, again, depending on where your market is. This particular option would have an internal critical review, so something that's reviewed by somebody inside your organization or inside the organization that completed the LCA itself. But the EPD verification is still done externally by a third party. So that gets you, that can count as one product in your 20 that you have to get. The third option here is for an industry-wide EPD for the product, but the company must have participated in that industry-wide EPD. Again, the same reference standards of ISO 14025, ISO 21930, or EN 15804. The industry-wide EPDs do have an external LCA critical review and the external EPD verification, and those are worth one product in the calculation. And then this is the option I think that we see most frequently now is the product-specific Type 3 EPD with the reference standards are the same. The ISO 14025, ISO 21930, and the EN 15804. And here is this option goes for the external critical review and the external EPD verification. So both the LCA and the EPD are going to be reviewed and verified by a third party, independent party. And that extra step of the external critical review of the LCA is what gets you that extra half a point on or half a product on your calculation. So this is for option one. And here we look at option two. And so there are I would say there are 2 different pathways for option two. The first pathway is for an embodied carbon or LCA action plan. And this is something that it's something that's prepared by the manufacturer or an organization where they're using their previously done LCA or their previously done EPD, and they are making a statement, a public statement about what actions they're going to take to improve their impacts. So so we have that, and then the next part of that is the second route for option two is what we call the optimization. And this is where we're going to be showing that whatever plans or processes that you've put in place to reduce your impacts have worked. And we're going to show those, and we're going to show those reductions in impacts. And so there's 3 different levels that you can have with this optimization. So the first level is a reduction in embodied carbon for 10% reduction in global warming potential. So that's the first level. The second level is greater than 10% reduction in global warming potential. And then the third level is a 20% reduction in global warming potential and a 5% reduction in 2 additional impact categories. So that third one is probably pretty hard to achieve. but I think there are some manufacturers out there that are starting to get to that. So for all three of those, you do need to have a the baseline that you're doing your optimization against, or your comparison against, would be either that product specific LCA or EPD. You can, for the first two, also use the industry-wide EPD to compare against. Again, you must have participated in the industry-wide EPD in order to use that. What we call the comparative analysis, or the optimization, is a completely separate form from the EPD, and it is also needs to be verified by an independent party. So I would say it depends on the program operator, but for us, the optimization does look very similar to an EPD. We do assign a special number to it for that matches up with the EPDs, that the baseline EPD. So it does have to be separate, and again, it does have to be verified by an independent party. Depending on which level of reduction that you've achieved, depends on how many products you can claim in your calculation. For option 2, you need to have 5 permanently installed products from 3 different manufacturers in order to have that, in order to claim those credits for option 2. Another important part for option 2 is that the reference documents that you're using for the optimization reports need to be compliant with that credit 1 option. So you can't use an LCA or an EPD that would not meet the criteria in option 1 in order to get the points for option 2. The other very important part for an optimization is that your optimization needs to include a narrative description of how you achieved those reductions. So it can't just simply be we achieved the reductions because our electricity grid got, was more renewable this year than it was last year. You actually have to put things in place in your manufacturing process, and you have to be able to describe it, what you've done to achieve those optimizations. It could be, as simple as we changed, over to a different lighting system that gave us, a change in energy or electricity use at our facility. Or it could be we found suppliers that are closer, so we're not spending as much environmentally, or probably even cost, going farther away to bring our products into the manufacturer. It could be a number of different things, but there does have to be that narrative description. And finally, here is a look at how those different credits are calculated. So on the left-hand side, we have a look at how to calculate that option 1. So you'll see several different types of products with the document type that we're using to achieve the point, and then how it's valued. So you'll see, at first we have like a steel deck that has a type 3 EPD with an external critical review. So that gets us 1.5 products. And then, at the bottom there, we have a roofing product that uses an industry-wide EPD that's going to get us 1 product. And so we have all of those, and those total up to 20 different products. It gives us 1 point in the LEED calculation. For option 2, same thing on the right-hand side. So we'll have, say, a gypsum board product that has an action plan that gets us half of a point, or half of a product. And then there's other products here. One of them has an optimization with 30% reduction in global warming, and 10% reduction in acidification, and 10% reduction in ozone depletion. That's going to get them 2 products. So all of those then add up to 5 different products, and again gets 1 point. So if you were able to achieve for a LEED project, if you're able to achieve both of these, you can get up to 2 points for your LEED calculations. So that's going to conclude my portion of the information for LEED and EPDs. And now we're going to, I'm going to hand it over to Keith, and he's going to talk a little bit more about how to leverage your EPDs and other ongoing and emerging issues.
Great, thank you, Beth. Yeah, I would just like to spend a few minutes here talking about some other uses of EPDs outside of the LEED Green Building Standard. While LEED has been an important driver for growing both the demand and the availability of EPDs in North America, we are seeing new government-led initiatives, broadly termed Buy Clean. And these Buy Clean programs set thresholds for the global warming potential of a product for government purchases. And to demonstrate that the threshold can be met, that's done using an environmental product declaration. California was the first Buy Clean program. It was signed into law in 2017 and then went into effect in 2022. And currently in California, Buy Clean affects government purchases of rebar steel, structural steel, mineral wool insulation, and flat glass. And then every 3 years, California will be updating their GWP thresholds for these 4 categories, and over time, those GWPs the thresholds will be lowered. Colorado also has a Buy Clean program that went into effect in January of this year for state-funded public projects, with a slightly larger list of eligible categories, including asphalt mixtures, cement and concrete mixtures, glass, post-tension steel, reinforcing steel, structural steel, and wood structural elements. And then New York State, starting this year, also has a Buy Clean program. This is just looking at concrete. Beginning this year, the state is just requesting EPDs. This helps manufacturers understand the forthcoming requirement. And beginning next year in 2025, that's when the GWP threshold will go into effect. New Jersey also has a Buy Clean concrete program, but it's looking at this a little bit differently. It is still requiring environmental product declarations, but rather than restricting purchases by the state, what they do is they provide financial tax incentives to those concrete producers who are able to demonstrate meeting the threshold with their environmental product declarations. Next slide. In addition to some of these established Buy Clean initiatives, there are some others that we're monitoring that are under development. One of the major one is the one which came forth through from the U.S. federal government under the Inflation Reduction Act, and this is being implemented through the EPA under their program called Label Program for Low Embodied Carbon Construction Materials. And this is very much in development. They've been soliciting comments earlier this year, but currently the eligible material classes include concrete, glass, asphalt, and various steel products. And currently they're considering 3 tiers of performance. So they'll set a threshold. If you can meet that threshold or be below it, that's better than industry average. And then there'll be a lower and a substantially lower tier. Those percentiles, I think, may be refined over time, but they've suggested some draft thresholds at this time. The Canadian government is also developing a Buy Clean program. This is under development. We have a little bit less information about this, but we expect to see more information coming out soon. And then at the state level, there have been a number of Buy Clean programs discussed in legislatures, including Minnesota, Washington, and Texas. So we may see some more of these initiatives emerging over time. Separate from these Buy Clean programs, there are other ways to leverage your environmental product declaration. So firstly, it provides a means for transparently communicating to customers about the information and the environmental impacts of a product. These EPDs are also being used to assist with this, decision-making for purchases. And so some purchasers may be looking for products that are able to either, well, primarily maybe have an EPD, but then in some cases also looking to identify products with lower impacts to the environment. We've also seen that certain customers may be requiring environmental product declarations just in order for your product to be included in their portfolio. Some of the leading architectural firms have established such requirements around having an environmental product declaration. And relatedly, this can also provide a competitive advantage for your products if they're being used in these LEED green building products, because purchasers of these products, if they have a choice And all things being equal, if one has an environmental product declaration, well, that may persuade the purchaser to go with the product with the EPD. And I guess from an internal perspective too, I want to highlight that life cycle assessment that underpins the environmental product declaration represents the most comprehensive assessment of impacts for a product. And so this can be used, I'd say, more internally for identifying where there are environmental hotspots along the supply chain and within the manufacturing process. And these areas can be examined for environmental improvements to try to lower the impact of the product over time. And lastly, the EPD is a demonstration to customers about a company's commitment to health, safety, and sustainability. All right, and I also want to talk a little bit, we've been really focused on environmental product declarations today, but as well as the global warming potential indicator that's used in that EPD, but I also want to talk about product carbon footprints. We are seeing a growing demand for these product carbon footprints. Some companies are requiring the disclosure of the carbon footprint for a product. It may be necessary for meeting certain customer requirements. Sometimes these product carbon footprints are used to underpin other claims, like a carbon neutral certification. And we also see the carbon footprint being used to both benchmark and track improvements over time. Now, both environmental product declarations and these product carbon footprints use similar data, and they all follow this life cycle assessment approach. So by going through this EPD process, it may be possible to leverage that effort and that time and to also produce a product carbon footprint. So the same sources of data need to be collected. A lot of the same software and data sets are used in both EPDs and product carbon footprints. Product carbon footprints can be prepared following various standards, although say the standard we would recommend is the international standard ISO 14067. And if you're going to be communicating publicly about your product carbon footprint, we also think it's important to have those verified following a standard such as ISO 14064-3. And that concludes what I had here to share with you about some additional uses of environmental product declarations. I'm going to turn it back to Beth, and we're going to talk a little bit about some common questions that we see around environmental product declarations.
Great, thank you, Keith. Yep, so we're going to have, I have a few here, frequently asked questions that we sometimes get from potential clients or clients that we work with. One of them is, what is the difference between a US EPD and an EU or European EPD? And I would say the biggest difference would be the impact assessment methods that are used. For the US, we use Tracy, which is developed by the EPA. And the European EPDs will use either what we call the CML method or an environmental EF method, environmental footprint, or even methods that are defined by EN 15804. The PCRs may be different as well, depending on the product. And that is the biggest difference between those PCRs will be the different scenarios that are described and put forth out in the PCR. So in the US, we may base our use phase on different things or ways of life, or the way things are used in the US, and the European PCRs will base it more on the way things are used in Europe. So those different phases and those different scenarios will be prescribed differently in the different PCRs. Even if we are looking at the same PCR, the difference between US and European, we may have to, we may have to define different scenarios for different locations. And then also the underlying model of the LCA may be different. And that's because the US PCRs will follow the ISO 21930 standard, while the European PCRs typically follow the EN 15804 standard. And those two standards define the underlying model differently. Where we're placing certain things when we're doing the model, they're placed in different areas, or they're accounted for in different places in the model. So while your total impact at the end will be the same or similar, where they fall in the life cycle stages may be a little bit different depending on which standard we're using. It is possible to create a US EPD with the tracing impact indicators using a North American PCR. And we can also make that acceptable in Europe by adding the European impact assessment methods. So it does depend a little bit on the product and the market itself, but it is possible. Unless there is a specific PCR or for European or a specific client need that needs to have it based on EN 15804, we are still able to use a US PCR and just add the European impact methods along with the tracing methods. One of the other questions that we get is, what is the timeline for getting an EPD and how can that be minimized? You know, the general timeline for us is about 5 to 7 months from the time the project starts until the EPD publication. A good chunk of that time is spent on data collection and getting the data from the client or the manufacturer. It can be quite complex to get that data. The other thing that can take a long time as part of that timeline is the external critical review and verification. And that, quite honestly, right now is because there is a shortage of reviewers and external reviewers that are available to do those things for us. So, and that is pretty much the case for, I would say for all program operators, consultants, verifiers. There's just a shortage of qualified people to do those things. So how can we minimize that time? The best way to minimize it is good and timely data input from the client. The more that we have to go back to the client and the manufacturer to clarify information or to find missing information, the longer it's going to take for us to be able to get the model and the LCA report done. And then the other question we get is, what do we need for this data collection? How, you know, what are all of the different things that we need? So if you're looking at getting an EPD or starting the process, one of the, here's some of the things that you'll need to look at when you're trying to get your data together. We're going to want a detailed product recipe. So what are all of the things that are going into your product? Along with that, we're going to want your supplier information. Where is it coming from? How does it get to you? Does it come by truck, by rail, by ship, or a combination? Do you have an SDS for that raw material? Does your raw material supplier have an EPD of their own that we could use? We also want to look at your packaging information. How is the product packaged? And then some manufacturing inputs and outputs. So the waste, water, energy, emissions, anything that comes in and out of your manufacturing facility. And then, so this bottom half of the list are for studies that are looking past the gate, so past manufacture. So when we're looking at installation and distribution and use phase, we're going to want to look at distribution modes and distances. How far is your product being distributed? How does it get distributed? Is it by truck? Is it by train? Is it a combination? Believe it or not, there are still some folks out there that are transporting by air, which is quite intensive, but that does happen. What's the installation process? Are there additional materials that are used to install the product? Is there any waste that's attributed to the installation? Do we have to trim, maybe 7% or 5% of the product off when we install it? Then also the use phase information. How is it cleaned? How much, so if we're cleaning something, how much water do we need to clean it? How much soap do we need to clean it? How many times do we need to clean it over its lifetime? And then also the end of life information. So is it able to be recycled? Is it typically landfilled? That sort of thing. And that is the end of my frequently asked questions, but I do believe we have someone handling questions.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you. Excellent presentation. We do have a lot of questions, so we'll dive into those at this moment in time, and I would like to start with a question, which is, it's a good question. What is the reason that there's a difference between a US and an EU EPD? I mean, I think you outlined well the, you know, the different underlying PCRs and whatnot, but why are there differences? Keith or Beth, either one of you want to take that?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, I guess. It's really hard to say. I don't know exactly the reasoning why, other than I think Europe is a little bit farther ahead than US in sustainability issues and environmental impact measuring and that sort of thing. So I think they're a little bit farther ahead than we are here in the US. And so they advanced their standards ahead of the international standards.
I think that's accurate. Here's a question, who are the leading architectural firms that are starting to require EPDs, and what products are they requiring them from? Well, I can definitely say that Gensler is one of those. And I know that Skanska Construction, I'm not sure if they always work with a certain architectural firm, but Gensler definitely. I don't know, Keith or Beth, are you familiar with any others that are going that way?
You know, Karen, those were the ones I was thinking of. So I think you captured that there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sure
It's just more and more. And then what products are they requiring them from? I think for Gensler, I'm thinking it's pretty much everything. Keith, maybe you could address this one. Would you recommend, and I think that, you know, I also could weigh in on this a little bit, but would you recommend EPDs for upholstered furniture? So we definitely do EPDs for furniture and upholstered furniture, but how do we deal with the things like sofas and chairs that are upholstered?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes, we would recommend EPDs for these types of products. We certainly have produced them in the past. That they're in demand for, you know, as office furniture products, sometimes used in lobbies. So it's certainly a need for it. BIFMA, the Business Institutional Furniture Manufacturers Association, has developed a series of product category rules here in North America, working with another program operator. And one of those covers the seating category, and that includes upholstered products, including chairs and sofas.
Sometimes the upholstery materials manufacturers have their own EPDs for their textiles, right?
Well, that's a good point, and that does raise another comment I would have. One thing particularly about upholstered furniture that we've seen is that the manufacturers want to provide their customers with a lot of options, and those can range from different fiber and textile types to beyond just different colored pattern types. And so that makes working with upholstered furniture a little bit more interesting, I think, because we have to look and identify either a more commonly used fabric that would meet customer needs, or try and identify a worst case if there's a lot of different types. But that does make those particular types of furniture a little bit different.
Right. Beth, here's one. How do we get the information for the LCA and the EPD, considering a manufacturer's trade secrets?
Yeah, that is a good question. And so as far as just getting the information, that actually varies by manufacturer. When we go to do data collection, sometimes we're getting that information from the operations manager, sometimes it's the quality person, sometimes it's a product person. So that actually getting the specific data is kind of varies between the different manufacturers. Regarding the trade secrets, we are allowed by ISO that if there's proprietary information, we can list. We don't have to put the proprietary information out in the EPD. We will put it in the LCA because it is the more detailed document, but that LCA is not the public-facing document. And if we are ever requested to provide the LCA, we are able to redact any of that for the proprietary information. We also, as part of our process, we have service agreements and NDAs in place that we can that we make sure that we're not giving out anyone else's proprietary information.
Great, thank you. Here's a question about PCRs. How are PCRs defined? Like, are they defined by their use, by a broad category? I mean, I think the purpose is really to kind of have a methodology, but maybe you could say a little bit more about that, Beth.
Yeah, so the product category rules, it's really, gosh, it's really dependent on the industry organization and the manufacturers in that industry, how broad they want to make the PCR or how constrained they want to make it. You could do there's for example, there's a split between flat glass and processed glass. So there's two different PCRs for those. And so the processed glass PCR covers a number of different types of glass. Should they be split out? Maybe, maybe not. And that really depends on the industry, so the industry itself. I would say one of the key things in determining the product category rule and how to split it out is looking at the final application of the product. How is that product going to be used? If the product is going to be used similarly across all of the products in that category, then you can put them all in one category rule. But if there's differences in the way the product is being used, then that really should have a separate product category rule.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So there's a question here about what really does a product specific EPD mean, and is it SKU specific? And I think one of the things that we didn't cover that is relevant is the amount. Like if you have a category of products that are different SKUs but sort of the same kind of product, as long as they don't vary by, isn't it 10% by weight or 10% by impact? Beth, maybe you could address that a little bit.
Yeah, so we would consider product specific. I would say, when you talk like a product line, the ISO standards do stipulate that if we use an average product for a product line, so they would all be similar products that we're doing this for. The ISO standards do state that the impacts for each individual that is included in the study, included in that average, be within 10% of the average. So we still, as part of the study, have to calculate the impacts for each one of the products that are included in that average. The difference might be if it's a scalable product, and we know that it's here's our base product, and everything is say 2 times or 3 times or whatnot for each of the different types. But usually, like we can do an average for the different products. Yeah, we want to make sure that it's within that 10%. The ISO standards do allow for deviation from that 10% if you can justify it. And in general, if say we have 6 products in an average and 4 of them fall within that 10% and 2 of them are maybe 12% off in the impacts, we can justify keeping those all in that average. That's not an exorbitant amount. So.
Right, but it's oftentimes it depends too. The EPD can include a bunch of different SKUs in one
Yes.
category and one LCA. Right. Okay.
And it can. I do want to just point out though too that for programs like EC3, they are getting to the point where the way that they calculate the uncertainty in their comparisons is if you have a product specific or manufacturing site specific EPD, you have a lower uncertainty. Your data is more certain according to them. So you can include more in one EPD. There are certain programs out there like EC3 that are starting to get to where they want it more specific to each product.
And there's a question about an example of a product-specific EPD versus an industry-wide EPD. And basically, that is, you know, a product-specific EPD is done by the manufacturer of those products. So it's, you know, the manufacturer takes that work on, and it's for their products. An industry-wide EPD is a bunch of different manufacturers of the same kind of product, like let's say sinks. And all the sink manufacturers, they all get together and give their data, and they roll up an EPD that's sort of an industry average. Is that a pretty accurate assessment?
Yep.
Here's one for you, Keith, about EPDs for solid hardwoods or solid softwoods that have FSC certification. And whether or not that's now starting to be taken into account in EPDs.
Yeah, great question. I'll speak to how ISO 21930 looks at wood that's obtained from a sustainably managed forest. But and I'd say that there's also, in parallel to this, efforts to try to better quantify some of the benefits from what FSC and other sustainably managed forest lands are doing to increase carbon sequestration. But going back to ISO 21930, what it says is that if we're using a wood material, we can assume that that wood is carbon neutral if one of two conditions are met. If it's sourced from a forest that is certified for sustainable practices, such as FSC, or if it's obtained from a country which can demonstrate that its forest canopy cover has increased over time. And so, you know, for example, here in the United States, our forest cover is increasing over time, and so we can apply an assumption in ISO 21930 that the use of those wood materials would essentially be carbon neutral, meaning that any emissions that might occur from the wood itself would be mitigated by the carbon dioxide that was absorbed by the tree during the growth phase. There's a reference to Europe too there, but it would be a similar approach using that ISO 21930 framework globally.
Great, thank you. For an industry without many EPDs and no clear PCRs, what would our advice be in, you know, pursuing EPDs and encouraging, you know, encouraging people to participate? And I mean, the first thing I would say is if you produce an EPD in an industry, you know, you can definitely get out in front of it and demonstrate your leadership. But I don't know, Keith or Beth, if you would have other comments on that.
Well, yeah, just an initial comment. If there are a number of manufacturers within a category that want to produce EPDs or that are producing EPDs, and there is no available PCR, we would recommend they reach out to SCS. We'd be happy to work with them to put together a product category rule for their category. But those do take time and some effort to put together the stakeholder committee. So setting that aside, an alternative, and Beth mentioned this, is there are these general standards for product category rules of building and construction products, ISO 21930 being the international example, and EN 15804 being the example in Europe. So, you know, we're often talking about product category rules for things like flooring or roof panels, but what these two standards do is define the category as building and construction products, so they can be used more broadly.
Great. And I think there's a question here about underlying LCA software and differences in results that are produced from different softwares. Do either of you have any comments on that?
There are differences in some of the databases that are used for LCA. I think what I would want to highlight is that the global warming potential indicator, the greenhouse gas emissions, do align well from the different databases based on our experience. And so while there can be some differences for some of the other indicators, we see that these databases are generally consistent across the global warming potential indicator. I think I'd also want to note from this is something that the U.S. federal government is thinking about in light of the Buy Clean program that is being developed by the EPA. And so they're currently investing money and effort into developing more publicly available data sets for life cycle assessment, so that and they're also working with the product category rules, or working as stakeholders with the product category rules to require the use of publicly available data. So while we're not there yet, over time we're going to get to a point where these EPDs will all be based on using the same data sets. So that'll minimize those differences.
That's great. And then there's a question about just providing data for LCAs and whether or not an LCA practitioner would have to be affiliated with SCS if we were going to do the EPD. And I think I could just explain that we are SCS is unique in that we have a large LCA team in-house, and we have the ability to do the LCA and the EPD, and of course there are the external reviews that take place outside of SCS that verify both the LCA and the EPD, but that if it's an external LCA practitioner, that SCS would be involved in the critical review of the LCA report. Is that right, Keith?
That's right. Yes, we work quite regularly with external LCA practitioners as the independent critical reviewers and EPD verifiers. So certainly work with this practitioner.
Yeah. So, there are a lot of individual questions that, might be specific to your own situation. And I would just say that SCS is always available to answer questions about EPDs and PCRs, and you can feel free to reach out to us with your questions. We've taken on a lot of questions, and I want to thank our presenters today. And with that, we will conclude. Everybody will be getting a copy of the recording, and we look forward to moving EPDs forward. I think we're kind of at the 10 years of EPDs mark, and we look forward to more transparency in the future, and we want to thank everyone for attending today.